So what we're going to do is explain, we're going to have a little discussion and a bit of reading, but I want to start with Will, because he's here on my left, and he's alphabetically right beside me. I just want to read, first of all, the citation from the Giller jury describing 419. And they describe it as the global novel. The book is emotionally and physically at home in the poverty of Lagos, Nigeria, and in the day-to-day life of North America. It tells us the ways in which we are now bound together and reminds us of the things that will always keep us apart. Will Ferguson is a master at dialogue and suspense. It is tempting to put 419 in some easy genre category, but that would only serve to deny its accomplishments and its genius. Wow. Congratulations,
Wow.
Yeah.
Will. Did my mom write that?
Yeah, I think, yeah. Well, she proofed it, so I think that's good enough. And in a nutshell, the drama that you tell, it comes out of this, the email scams from Nigeria, which is like, hardly does justice to it, but that's where it begins. And many of us have had those kinds of solicitations. So can you just explain why they inspired you, how they inspired you to create this work?
Well, it was on my previous novel, A Spanish Fly, which was about con men and call girls in the Dust Bowl of the 1930s and the jazz clubs. And that came from my dad. My dad grew up in the Dust Bowl of Saskatchewan, and he was suspiciously well-informed about con artists. And he'd tell us tales about Suitcase Simpson and Henry the Horse. So I wanted to write a novel about con men, and in researching cons in general, I came across a reference to 419, which we all know. It's I am an exiled Nigerian diplomat. I need your help to move $30 million into your account, and I will give you 10%. And I wasn't interested because that's obviously an email scam. I was researching the 1930s. But there was a footnote, and the footnote said, today's 419 email scam is a modern variation of the Spanish prisoner. So then I thought, well, what's the Spanish prisoner? So I checked that, and that goes back 500 years to the Spanish Armada, the Elizabethan era. After the Spanish Armada, a lot of Englishmen were drowned or swept off to sea, and letters, not emails obviously, but quill and ink letters would circulate saying, I am the daughter of an imprisoned English nobleman. I need to move his millions of dollars. If you could just help me bribe the guards. And that's when I thought, wow, this isn't just a technological gimmick. This is something really deep. And that's what hooked me. So I thought, my first idea was comedic. I thought, wouldn't it be funny if there really was this poor Nigerian prince who has millions of dollars just trying to give it away, nobody will take it. But that didn't really go anywhere. Then I started to research, and I came across a story of a fellow, and I just realized how tragic it was. And then I got curious, then I wanted to know, well, why Nigeria? I went down the rabbit hole and came out 2 years later.
And why do you think people are so vulnerable to those scams?
Well, they're attacks on hope, is what they are. And it's advanced fee fraud. I think it's an evolutionary skill, is that you balance reward with risk. So what they're saying is, people often, a friend of mine, one of his relatives got stanged? What's the word? Stung. Words are my life.
Spelling, I've learned, is not your life.
Yes. I just want to show you this. She asked me to sign, this is Carol's book. She asked me to sign it.
It's hopeless.
And she's a terrible speller because I asked for help and she didn't. So what I wanted to write was, to Carol with warm, non-larcenous wishes. Well, who the hell knows how to spell larcenous? So it's spelled how it's spelled here, with Carol's help, because I stopped and I said, how do you spell larcenous? With her input, here's what I came up with.
All right, let's move on.
Larcenis.
We're not here to talk about it. Let's just move on.
So I told her that just tell people I was drinking.
I'm left-handed. This happens to left-handed people.
Anyway,
no,
what were we talking about?
You know what I want you to do? Because
yes.
I want you to read the opening passage of it. And I'm going to get everybody to read the beginning scene. And so this, and then we're going to, this tells you, this is so brilliant.
Okay.
Anyway, here we go.
So this is the opening of the book. A car falling through darkness, end over end, one shuddering thud following another, fountains of glass showering outward, and then a vacuum of silence collapsing back in. The vehicle came to rest on its back at the bottom of an embankment below the bridge, propped up against a splintered stand of poplar trees. You could see the path it had taken through the snow, leaving a churn trail of mulch and wet leaves in its wake. And then, into the scentless winter air, the seeping odor of radiator fluid, of gasoline. They climbed down on grappling lines, leaning into their descent. The lights of the fire trucks and ambulances washing the scene in alternating reds and blues, throwing shadows first one way and then the next. Countless constellations in the snow, glass catching the light. When the emergency team finally arrived at the bottom of the embankment, they were out of breath. Within the folded metal of the vehicle, a buckled dashboard, bent steering wheel, more glass, and in the middle, something that had once been a man. White hair, wet against the skull, matted now in a thick red mud. "Sir, can you hear me?" His lips were moving as the life poured out of him to wherever it is that life goes. "Sir," but no words came out, only bubbles.
That's the openings, and that scene of a man driving off the road in Calgary is then linked.
In an unnamed Western Canadian city.
Oh, right. Yeah,
with the stampede.
you tell me it's not. Yeah, exactly.
It could be the famous Winnipeg
and there's
stampede.
foothills in the distance.
That's right. It could be the
go
famous.
figures. I think it sounds like somewhere in Cape Breton for sure.
Well, my family's from Cape Breton, so you never know.
Yeah, you never know. But anyway, this man drives off the road in Calgary, and then he's linked to this sinister crime world in Lagos in Nigeria, and a daughter who is compelled to seek out those who tormented her father. But what really interests me is how the Nigerian scammers, when you go looking for them, you make them, they're not devices, they're full-blooded characters. Now, what do you want your readers to know about the lives of the people who actually perpetuate these scams?
Well, they're trying to live life with as much dignity as they can in the situation that they've inherited. Largely through no fault of their own. So I wanted to tell both sides. So the idea is you set up what you think is going to be like a standard police procedural in the novel. There's an investigation, there's a death, and then you flip it over. The book is based around a whole series of images of mirrors and windows, because you know how sometimes you think you're looking through a window, but you're actually looking at yourself, you're seeing your own reflection. So the book is based on a kind of a mirror world, and then you flip it over, and hopefully the Nigerian world is richer and more real than her world. And her world is kind of the pale, Laura's world is more of a pale reflection. And the Nigerian world is more real. So that's what I was aiming for.
But it's a really, really dark place. And anyone who's read Will before and is expecting to laugh, because he's a very funny writer, there are a lot of humor in this, and especially in the dialogue. You can't leave your humor behind. It's clear from just even tonight. But what was it like to live in such a paranoid place while you were writing this novel?
It affects you. It affects you because it affects my wife more than me, I think, because she has to put up with me, and you get really paranoid. And I may have told you this story before, but I was writing in the middle of it, and the doorbell rings, and it's the guy in a uniform saying, "Your pilot light's out in the furnace." I said, "Really?" Really? He goes, "Yeah," I said, "a clipboard." Because there's a scam where they go down and when they squirt oil I read about it. Under the furnace, and then they say, "Oh, your furnace is going to blow up. Here, call this approved repairman." He comes over, wipes the oil up, charges you $500. So I was onto this guy. I wasn't fooled for a second. So I followed him down the stairs, like right behind him, into the basement. I stood over him as he checked the furnace, and then I followed him back up the stairs, and it turns out he was just from the gas company.
Yeah.
And the furnace, so it does affect. It affects you. The more you write about cons, you see them everywhere. You start seeing them everywhere. You get paranoid.
All right, I'm going to just move on to Alex, if that's all right. We'll come back to a more general discussion with everyone later. But your jury citation is really lovely, too. A woman mistakes a man for a log, and so starts Alex Oline's engrossing novel, Inside. The novel jumps between decades, locations, and characters with a precision that makes Oline's hard work seem effortless. The novel is full of surprises and things to admire, but the writing is genuinely clever because it always serves the characters. Inside is a novel about people. It is beautifully crafted and beautifully told. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And since that hints at the opening, actually, maybe we should begin, because the opening of the book is a great place to start our conversation, if you would.
Sure. So this is Montreal, 1996. At first glance, she mistook him for something else. In the fading winter light, he could have been a branch or a log, even a tire. In the many years she'd been cross-country skiing on Mount Royal, she'd found stranger debris across her path. People left behind their scarves, their shoes, their inhibitions. She'd come across lovers naked to the sky, even on cold days. In spite of these distractions, the mountain was the one place where she felt at peace, especially in winter, when tree branches stretched empty of leaves and she could see the city below her, its clusters of green-spired churches and gray skyscrapers laid out, graspable, streets rolling down to the old port, and in either direction, the bridges extending over the pale water of the St. Lawrence. This winter had been mild, and what snow did fall first melted, then turned to ice overnight. Now, at the end of January, it had finally snowed all night and all day, at last enough to ski on. Luckily, her final appointment that afternoon had canceled, leaving her free to drive up before the light was gone. She slipped around the chalet and headed into the woods, losing the vista of Montreal below, gaining muffled silence and solitude, the trees turning the light even fainter. One skier had been here before her, leaving a path of parallel stripes. On a slight downhill slope, she crouched down and picked up speed as she moved around a bend. Turning, she saw the branch or whatever it was too late. Though she tried to slow down, she wasn't quick enough and ran right into it and was knocked out of her skis, falling sideways into the snow, realizing only when she sat up that what had tripped her was the body of a man.
Oof. The man, as we learn very, very quickly, is the man who had attempted suicide. He attempted to hang himself. And Grace gets involved in his life because that's the sort of woman. Well, yes and no. That's the sort of woman Grace is. I mean, what's so wonderful about this novel, what's so intriguing, is that all the characters pick up on acts of random kindness. They are drawn to help a stranger. Mm-hmm. And I just want to, what do they have in common? What can you tell us? Because she's the first, and then she delivers that kind of gift to someone else, and it gets passed on, mm-hmm. almost like a baton of kindness through the novel. What is it they have in common?
Right, so there's really three main storylines in the novel, and as each of them begins, a person comes across someone else who is in crisis, in trouble, and feels compelled, for whatever reason, to reach out and help them through it, or to try, not always successfully. And sometimes a person who is a helper in one storyline reappears in another storyline as the person who is in need of help. So it's meant to be, I guess, a feeling of connectedness and of people trying to insert themselves into each other's lives, to get inside. And it's sort of a what comes around goes around sort of a effect that, one reason to reach out and try to help someone is that inevitably in your life you're likely to find yourself in a position where you are the one in need of help.
But these people only survive because of that moment, because of this completely unanticipated, ad hoc, random moment mm-hmm. that someone encountered them. They would not be alive if it wasn't for that. It's mm-hmm. it's extraordinarily fragile, this world mm-hmm. you've created.
Yeah, it's fragile, but I think the book is also a lot about resilience. I mean, there's a lot of dark things that happen because there are these people in crisis, but there are also these moments of human nature at its best when people are empathetic and they don't allow someone to, slip away from them, and they really latch on and try to bring someone back to life. And so there's a lot of darkness, but then there are moments when people do come through on the other side.
There's a line that I made note of, and I just want to read it and get you to comment on it. The line is, "Sometimes you need to surprise yourself with randomness to prove you have depths that even you do not understand." Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What compels people to do that?
I don't know. I mean, I think the notion of surprise is a way of learning something about yourself. So for each of these characters, a lot of the things that happen to them involve meeting someone from another culture or someone who's just extremely different from them personality-wise, and it's a way of expanding their world, of moving beyond their own personal borders and getting a little bit bigger, becoming a slightly different person through your encounter with someone else.
But is it within them, or is it in the culture, or what do you think? Where does that come from?
Well, we're all a complicated knot of different factors. I mean, of course, it's partly where you come from, and it's your family, and it's your own individual issues that you have managed to create for yourself, as we all do through living. So I don't know that it's possible to really disentangle them. But one of the things I was interested in doing in this book was trying to examine this notion of helping on different levels. So there's sort of individual helping, and then there's professional helping, in that there are characters who are or therapists or international aid workers, and so helping is kind of built into their job or their work, and sometimes involves going to another country and trying to help a whole other people who are in crisis. So the idea for me is that helping isn't just something that we do, in our intimate day-to-day lives, but it's also an issue that is brought up for us as a country. Where and when and how do we try to help other nations that are experiencing difficulty?
It was a long time before you've come around to writing about Montreal, and I've read some of the things. You can explain if you like why it took you so long, but you finally turned to that city. And when you did finally turn to it, what was it like? Did you have to rediscover Montreal to write about it?
Right. Well, so I grew up there, but I haven't lived in Montreal for a long time. And when I first started writing, I was living in the States, and I found it very hard to write about Montreal because I felt like the Americans around me, there's so much about Montreal that's so complex and so unique and hard to explain to Americans, and so as to the rest of Canada, I'm sure. But I would not want to refer to something as like a dépanneur, because Americans would be like, "What's a dépanneur?" They don't know what it means, and there's so much commingling of French and English, and so I just thought, well, this is too complicated, and I am not up to the task. So I wrote a lot of work that was just set in a kind of really generic suburb, similar to but a much flatter version of the one that I grew up with. And so I was really, dissatisfied with that. But I think also I wrote this book in a lot of ways out of homesickness, because I really miss Montreal, and I've lived in a lot of places since then, but I haven't really settled in one. So Montreal is still very much home to me, and so writing the book and writing that opening scene on the mountain, that's a place where I spent so much time growing up. So it was a little bit a way of reacquainting myself with the landscape of my own past, I guess.
But even the color of the opening scene. The late afternoon in Montreal in the winter, that blue. Looking at 3 Montrealers here, that blue of the mountain and snow and the blueness of it, and the smell of a Montreal bagel and all these things. These you evoke the city. And you'll excuse me because I lived in Montreal for a while, and I was just rolling around in these images.
There was a list of things that I knew if I had to write a book set in Montreal that had to be in there, and it was like winter light, bagels, French and English. So I had to make sure that I got that all in there somehow.
Okay, thanks. Nancy, your jury citation from the Giller jury was, I'll read it as follows. The mystery of Lily Azarov, the imposter bride of Nancy Richler's rich, complex, compassionate novel, shifts through Lily's past and her daughter Ruth's present, interwoven with the perceptions of her whole extended family as they adjust to the comforts of life in Montreal. All have been touched by the grotesque violence of the Holocaust. All find ways to prevail, tell stories, and laugh. All except for Lily, whose burden of guilt is too great to acknowledge. A wonderfully nuanced work of fiction by a master of the craft. Congratulations for that. That's beautiful. Now, the inspiration for this story is quite personal, and maybe you could explain where it comes from. Maybe, you know what, we begin with the passage, because I think that it helps to set it up.
So this is Montreal, 50 years after your start. This is Montreal 1946 in what they now call Mile End. In a small room off a banquet hall in Montreal, Lily Kramer sat in silence with her new husband. It was summer and the room was hot. There were no windows and no door, only a curtain beyond which the guests, almost none of whom she knew, washed down sponge cake and herring with shots of schnapps and vodka. Lily and her husband sat on either end of the couch on which she assumed they were meant to consummate their marriage. In front of the couch was a table laid with fruit and hard-boiled eggs. Her husband picked up a plum and rolled it in the palm of his hand. His name was Nathan, and she had known him for a week. It was his brother Saul she had been meant to marry, a man she had corresponded with but hadn't met, who had caught one glimpse of her as she disembarked at the station and decided he wouldn't have her. Lily watched Nathan roll the plum in his hand and wondered what his brother had seen in her that made him turn away. Nathan picked up a knife and began scoring the skin of the plum into sections. They had not yet touched, not even a brush of hand or lip upon becoming husband and wife. She could still count the number of glances they had exchanged, The first, when she'd sat on the couch at the house where she was staying, so ashamed by the rejection at the station that she'd had to struggle to meet his gaze while he apologized on behalf of his brother and entire family. "Your brother cannot even apologize on his own behalf?" she asked. She was surprised by her shame, disappointed. She had no time to waste, no strength, on a man who fled at the mere sight of a woman. Or so she would have thought. "Not even that," Nathan replied. "No great loss then," she said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel into her voice. She had crossed 2 oceans to marry this Saul. She had nothing and no one to return to. "The loss is his," Nathan said quietly. She had thought he would leave then, beat a hasty retreat from his brother's misdemeanor, but he didn't. He remained standing before her, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked finally. His eyes were warm and brown. There was no pity in them. And he seemed to like what he saw. Already there was heat in his gaze. He returned the next day to formalize their engagement. Why the rush, Lily wondered, when he reappeared at the door? It was not as if she were fielding other offers, would be taken by another if he didn't quickly stake his claim. But then she knew, thought she knew. It was the rush of color to her face when he had first entered the room, the lowered gaze that she'd had to force upwards, her chin raised in defiance of what she felt. He had returned to banish her shame. He brought witnesses and brandy, and the same heat in his gaze. He was a lucky man, Lily thought at that moment. His desire inclined him to acts of goodness.
Heat in his gaze. Wow, that's hot. And they haven't even touched hands yet. This is like, what? But now the story, the backstory, I mean, this actually, these 2 men, 2 brothers, this woman arrives from Eastern Europe, gets off the train, and the man who's to marry her takes one look and flees the train station.
That was my great-uncle Wolf.
So tell us the story about this.
So that was my great-uncle. I think his name was Wolf. I never actually met him because he didn't marry my grandmother. So my grandmother came over not after the war. She came over well before the war in 1903. And she came over to marry a man she'd never met. And he decided he wouldn't have her. So I was obviously very interested in that and wondered what that would be like and started writing a little bit about that. But as soon as I started writing, I moved away from my own grandmother. First, my grandfather, the man who did marry her, was Wolf's brother, but already it was really different. Like, my grandfather didn't really have heat in his gaze for her. He was kind of forced into the marriage, but it did endure, and they had many children and all of that, so it was very different. But so it took off immediately from the inspiring spark, but it was the original thing of having nothing and no one and coming, and what is that like? Although my character has lost much more than my grandmother.
Yes,
So.
yeah, and it's many twists and turns in the story. Believe me, this is quite the narrative.
Yeah.
And you wrote this before you returned to live in Montreal. You were still in Vancouver at that point?
I never dreamed I would return to live in Montreal, and not because I don't like it, but because I was very settled in Vancouver. I'd been there 25 years. And it's funny, I got really homesick while I was writing it, and I moved back to Montreal because I have elderly parents there, but really, I'm not that altruistic. I was really, I got homesick from Montreal as I was writing, and I thought how interesting it would be to live there, and it's such an entirely different city from what I'm writing about. Like, my Montreal, we didn't go back and forth, English and French. I left Montreal at 18 before the PQ came in. I was Anglophone, and I don't speak French, and it's just absolutely mortifying, but I don't speak French. I'm learning it now. So it was a very different city, and had I written it in Montreal, it would be, had I been living there, I think I would have written a very different book. I'm sort of glad I wrote about the Montreal that was, and I hadn't had contact with it, and it was very frozen in my mind. So, yeah.
But I mean, we talk about the Montreal, the PQ, and the Quiet Revolution and all that. Then there's the Montreal of the Jewish immigrants, and
we were so insular. Yeah,
very insular, but it's rich. I mean, look at what came out just out of Mordecai Richler alone. I mean, look at the body of work that came out of there.
It was
and you tapped into that in this novel.
Well, I did. I mean, I was my challenge. I grew up in a suburb, a very bland suburb. It looks bland from the outside, and it was so rich and so complicated and so complex and so wonderful and so difficult. And that's why I swore I'd never write a book about it. And it took me many, many years to write this book. I must have written 8 books, 8 drafts that were not this book until I finally wrote this book. It was because I thought, how on earth will I ever do it any kind of justice? So it was very challenging.
Was it because you thought it would be too hard, or because there's something else in you that was resisting that?
It was too hard. I didn't want to go anywhere near the Holocaust. I didn't want to. There were just so many things I didn't want to write about, and the story just insisted and didn't. I put it away every year at Christmas. I would put it away and say it's done. It's not going to work. Every year, January 2nd, I'd say. So, and I did that for many years. So.
I'm very glad you did. Kim, I want to start by asking you this very interesting title, Rue. Mini. I'm not going to get it right.
But I know that in English you have a word sound, rue, right? To rue the day.
Oh yes, you know there's.
But it doesn't have the same meaning.
But it was 2 meanings in your version of it. Just you can describe what the meaning of the title is.
Rue well pronounced rue in Vietnamese. Now I'm confused. I don't know which language I'm speaking, but rue in Vietnamese means a lullaby, or the verb to lull a child to bed, because we don't have any other expression to put a child to bed, or in French it would be to go to bed with the child, for example. So it's always to lull the child to bed. And I just thought it's such a beautiful word. But if you are Vietnamese in Vietnam, it's a word that you use every day. So you don't, we don't see the poetic side of it. And in French, it means a small stream or a brook, I've learned. I'm sorry for my English, because I've never studied in English. So so I thought it fit perfectly to have both French and Vietnamese, because I think I have both cultures very much integrated in me.
Absolutely.
And from Montreal. I'm a Montreal.
And bagels.
Montreal is definitely home.
Just before I get you to read, I was going to just read the jury citation from your nomination. Rue takes us on a difficult journey from Vietnam to Quebec, from one language to another, rendered in exquisite, unsentimental prose. Kim Thuy is a born storyteller, but she rewrites the traditional immigrant narrative in a completely new way, makes it whole and wondrous once more.
My mom paid for this.
They've been talking.
How many mothers are on this jury, Jack? Must be a lot. Do you want to read your opening part of it? It's
Yes.
very, very poetic and beautiful.
I came into the world during the Tet Offensive in the early days of the Year of the Monkey, when the long chains of firecrackers draped in front of houses exploded polyphonically along with the sound of machine guns. I first saw the light of day in Saigon, where firecrackers, fragmented into a thousand shreds, colored the ground red like the petals of cherry blossoms, or like the blood of the 2 million soldiers deployed and scattered throughout the villages and cities of a Vietnam that had been ripped in two. I was born in the shadow of skies adorned with fireworks, decorated with garlands of light, shot through with rockets and missiles. The purpose of my birth was to replace lives that had been lost. My life's duty was to prolong that of my mother. My name is Nguyễn Anh Tĩnh. My mother's name is Nguyễn Anh Tĩnh. My name is simply a variation of hers, because a single dot under the I differentiates, distinguishes, dissociates me from her. I was an extension of her, even in the meaning of my name. In Vietnamese, hers means peaceful environment, and mine, peaceful interior. With those almost interchangeable names, my mother confirmed that I was the sequel to her, that I would continue her story. But the history of Vietnam, written with a capital H, thwarted my mother's plans. History flung the accents on our names into the water when it took us across the Gulf of Siam 30 years ago. It also stripped our names of their meaning, reducing them to sounds of once strange, and at once strange and strange to the French language. In particular, when I was 10 years old, it ended my role as I'm sorry, as an extension of my mother.
Thank
There
you.
you go. Sorry for my
No,
English.
no
I've been up
apologies.
since 5 this morning, so I'm losing my English.
And we should point out it's a beautiful translation as well. That Sheila Fishman did the
Yes.
translation. She's just an artist in her own right. You've had a life in Montreal. You've a very rich and storied life of as a just a Montrealer. But just to go back to this extremely painful story of your own family coming over and what they went through, not just humiliation and near-death experiences, but just awful, ugly material that you had to. Now, how difficult was that?
I never thought of it as something negative. Actually, I think I was very lucky to have lived those experiences because I was born very weak. I had all kinds of allergies against, fish, seafood, eggs, milk, the cold. And in Vietnam, cold was 28 degrees, or even the wind.
Very much like Montreal.
So and I would just swell up, and luckily we took that boat, and when we took that boat and we arrived in Malaysia, the first meal that we got from the Red Cross was sardines in tin cans, and because we were so hungry, we had not eaten for a while, and because it was nighttime, 2 a.m. without electricity, so we didn't know what we were eating. So we just jumped in, we ate. My parents didn't remind me that I was allergic or not. Well, anything, we didn't think at all. We were just hungry. So we ate. I didn't have a reaction then, and I haven't had a reaction for the last 33 years. And I have no other, all my allergies are gone. So I've become a lot stronger and a lot more resistant today. And my parents would tell you that I'm unkillable now. They could feed me with poison and I would still survive. But I was not the only one. There was another one who traveled with us, and she suffered severe asthma. And we thought that she would die because we were sleeping directly on dirt, on a dirt floor. And she didn't have one attack for the last 35 years. So I think we're very lucky that we survived, of course. But with that, we got stronger, and we didn't have to make any effort. I didn't put in any effort to become stronger or more resistant. It just came by survival instinct, I think.
Whatever doesn't kill you makes you strong.
Exactly. So I didn't see this story, this past as something painful. On the contrary, I'm very thankful that I've had that life.
But when you start to weave the worlds of, first of all, Vietnam, and then to the boat experience to Montreal, there's this one incredible scene where people want to take you camping.
Oh yes,
and there's bugs. I mean, you have bugs, right? We go camping, go out in the woods, it's a normal thing, mosquitoes. Can you describe why that's shocking?
We arrived in Granby because my parents could speak French and English, so that's why Quebec selected us, and we ended up in Quebec, and we didn't know anybody, so they sent us to Granby, a small city about an hour from Montreal. And we got there, and the whole city was there to welcome us. And in Granby, there was nothing to do except the zoo, right? So they took us to the zoo. The kids, we went to the zoo probably 3 or 4 times every weekend, invited by different families. And we couldn't say no because they were gestures of kindness, right? So you just accept, you go there, and then the monkeys say hello to you. And we got to know each other, and then... the first trip also was to the cabane à sucre, how do you say that?
The maple syrup.
And again, we arrived at the end of March, so that was the first activity. So we didn't understand why there was maple syrup all over. Meat, dessert, soup, everything was. So I didn't eat. I maple syruped out for the last until I met my husband, who's French Canadian. I fell in love with him, so I fell in love with maple syrup again. But and the camp, that was also one of the first activities. And for I think most Canadians, camping is a treat, I think. But we arrived from a refugee camp. We didn't have a toilet for 4 months. So we didn't understand why they took us to camp And because we didn't speak French, so we couldn't tell them, why do we have to sleep in a tent again? And why do we have to go to this, portable toilet? And so we thought that we were punished again, and we were sent to the camp. But so there were many misunderstandings, and back then, in '79, it was, and in Granby, there was no Asian food or Asian cuisine, of course. And so at lunchtime in elementary school, you go back home to eat, right? So and we were invited by all these families. So we never got to go to our house. We always went to, and there were so many of them that they had to draw a name, and everybody served us with rice, but minute rice, right? And we eat sticky rice, So and they served us on a plate with a fork. And we didn't know how to, because Vietnamese, you take the bowl and you push with the chopstick. So now we couldn't take the rice at all. So there were many misunderstandings when we got there.
Great story. Russell, I want to turn to you finally. Wangursky being W, and that makes you the last one. Sorry about having to wait this long. But Whirl Away is a collection of short stories. And can you just, before we go on to other questions, can you explain what ties these stories together?
I think what ties them together the most is the fact that it's a whole raft of characters whose best skill is also their downfall. The thing they do best, their best defense strategy, suddenly doesn't work anymore. And when it doesn't work, they keep trying endlessly to make it work again. It's like they've met their kryptonite. And they spin faster and faster out of control because they can't figure out how to make something that was so simple again.
The jury citation is this: Whirl Away is a marvelous collection of stories. Each story stands starkly and wonderfully alone. Some of them carry a very quick thump. Others have the scope, the extra pages that allow a glimpse at longer lives. Regrets, mistakes, accidents, the stories are full of them and their consequences. They are full of people trying to cope, trying to change, trying to live. They are stories of lives close to breaking, written with great confidence and skill. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What is the whirling away? What is the whirling away that's going on for these people?
They spin like dervishes, faster and faster and faster, trying to get out of their world, trying to make things happen that they can't do anymore.
But when we meet them, each of them, they've just come, we meet them at the moment of their crisis, when everything was going along just fine, thank you very much, and then something just propels them into another world. It's a crisis, every single character, an existential crisis they're suffering.
I don't think they'd see it as existential. I mean, that's the wonder of it, is I don't think they see beyond the fact that they're trapped in something they don't understand. To have an existential crisis, you almost have to have a better sense of your existence than these guys do. I like them all. They're all friends of mine. And I wish I could help them, but they won't take any advice, so.
Well, you sure can't help the character in the very first pages. If you could just open, this is the first story in your anthology. Yes. I think you're going to read from The Bolt, right?
Oh, look, words. That's delightful. I opened the book in Vancouver, and all I could see was squiggles. Well, my eyes are getting old, so there's a magic of light.
Are you okay?
Oh, yes, I can see words. Right. That's a great thing. The bolt came through the open back window of the truck. It came in end over end. From a distance, if anyone had been watching it, concentrating, it might actually have appeared that the truck was doing the tumbling and the bolt was flying perfectly straight. Just a rusty bolt John had found in the driveway, a bolt he'd tossed in the back of the pickup with the duffel bags and the miter saw and the rest of his stuff. He didn't hear the bolt whisper as it spun, the rushing air whistling through the even gaps of the threads. He had his hands full trying to figure out just what was happening to the pickup as it cut through the bright pink flowering fireweed, the truck leaving a four-wheeled, mown trail behind it, the wheels throwing up grass and mud and the petals of the flowers. The bolt caught him in the curve at the back of his skull, at the midline, and just below his hair, hitting that smooth dent where a lover might rest the heel of her hand. John had a brief moment to think about what if. What if he hadn't reached across the seat towards the glove compartment? What if he hadn't overcorrected when the wheels touched the shoulder? He didn't even get to, what if I hadn't put the bolt in the back? Or, more importantly, why did it fly so straight? Or, what are the chances of that happening? The bolt was still moving at close to 100 kilometers an hour, the same speed the truck had been going before the front end smashed nose first into the bank. John, safely held in the grasp of the seatbelt, had slowed as quickly as the truck had. He didn't feel the bolt hit. John, for once, didn't feel anything at all. The truck ended up on its roof, one wheel crookedly spinning long after the other three had stopped, and no one noticed the wreck until the next morning. Then, a long-haul truck driver, riding high up in the cab of his Freightliner, saw the rusting bottom of the chassis standing out against the green and pink of the firewood, rectangular and ochre and perched on the edge of a small, peaty stream. There was already cold dew on the windshield when the driver waded down through the hide plants to look through the window on the driver's side.
Talk about your random acts, eh? And that's so you tell me that you wish you could help them. You killed that guy. I should point this out.
I didn't kill him.
He didn't have to die.
He didn't have to be driving.
Okay.
He could perfectly well have not been driving that day. He could have stayed home.
You work as hard as a journalist as you do as a writer, as a fiction writer. And does your journalism help or hinder your fiction writing?
It helps in a bunch of different ways. Number one, it exposes me to huge numbers of people. I'm the editorial page editor, so I have to handle the two creatures of the apocalypse, the letter to the editor writers and the commenters on the internet, who I have to approve the comments for the whole paper. So I'm already dipped in a sort of a steaming stew of some of the nastiest people alive. I tried to picture them. I just figured they're all 58-year-old men naked in bathrobes in their mother's basement. And they're all going, ah, as they send it in.
And these are the people who buy your paper.
Yes. Well, actually, no. They're more likely to get it for free on the internet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But no, that's a help, and the other help is deadlines. I write a ton of stuff. Right now, it's 2 columns a week and 5 editorials, and I do freelance magazine work because newspapers don't pay well either. And I've got a youngster in college and another one in college in 2 years. So. But it means that there's a lot of deadlines to keep up to. There's a lot of words. And even when I go away, often I write the editorials from away if I'm in a writing program or something, because it's like calisthenics in the morning. I'll drink a tomato juice, I'll write an editorial, and then I'll get down to fiction or nonfiction, depending on where I am and what I'm doing. So it's a sort of an ugly deal I cut with the paper. They still get the editorials, but I don't get paid. Journalists are not great mathematicians.
This other volunteer work you did as a firefighter, and I know that it had a great effect on you. I noticed that you were looking for the exits as soon as you sat down, and we appreciate that. We appreciate having you with us tonight. But what is it about that experience? I mean, because when you wrote about it, when you're burning down the house, it was painful stuff for you, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, the biggest thing is the sheer randomness. Someone has the windows of their car open, they're driving to town, they've got a pile of resumes. The resumes start to blow away because the window's open. So they reach over and put their hand on the resumes and they go off the road. Or someone decides to go to the store and a guy coming down the hill has a stroke and T-bones their car at an intersection. And all of it is stuff that is seconds away. And that's the thing you see that, often you go to a scene there, if you could have been there just, 3, 4, 5 seconds, 2 minutes earlier.
Do you see that all the time? Do you see all the possibilities in every moment? Do you see all the things that could happen right now?
I get it. I get a terrible time for that, but yes.
It must be great fun.
Yeah. I get a terrible, I go to a restaurant and I think, okay, who's going to choke? If it's that person, can I get my arms around them? If they fall down behind the banquette, I'll never get them out. No, and I count fire exits. I'm terrible. The only thing is I'm better at flying. My wife has much worse problems with flying. We sit down, she says, the exit row is 3 rows behind us. You count by holding onto the seat backs. So I guess we're perfectly matched in that.
And it must be like really romantic when you say, and she says, let's go in, there's a nice hot tub in this hotel. Hot tubs carry a lot of germs and you can drown in them. No, not that?
I worry more about suction injuries than I worry about...
I hadn't even thought about suction injuries, Russell. Jesus.
People die horrible deaths in hot tubs, and it's not germs. No.
Cut us loose. I can't take it. Oh, God. And we just have some time left, and I just want to ask some general questions of everybody. And first question I want to ask, who's going to win?
I know it's not me. So.
I'm going to a party on Tuesday night, and I'm going home.
Okay.
That part I know.
A good plan. Well, I mean, you're all winners. I mean, that is
Absolutely.
and that's not just a platitude. You're all winners.
I think we should all agree right now, in front of all these witnesses, that whoever wins will split it. What do you guys say? You're up for it? Kim's up for it.
Because I know it's not me.
And all these people are listening, so if we agree...
This is some kind of Nigerian scam.
No. Just give me a little bit of money, Russell. Just a little bit up front. I promise you, it's
A
yours.
percentage, yeah.
I want you each to say where you were and what you were doing and how you reacted when you heard that you were nominated. Will?
For the shortlist?
For the shortlist, yeah.
This is weird. I was told it was at, I would know at, was it 10:30, which I thought was Calgary time. So I thought that, yeah, anyway, I didn't know. I thought it was like another 2 hours away. So I drove my son to school and I came home and I got a phone call from Andrea Megger, the publishing director of Penguin, who's here somewhere in the audience, Andrea. And I really thought the announcement was like another 2 hours away. And so she phoned and told me, so it was great. So I was expecting to get stressed out in about 2 hours.
Okay.
So I was in my, but where I was physically, I was in my house.
Alex?
I was, at home in my pajamas, as I often am, because that's what writers do all the time. And it's a very 21st century moment because I found out on Twitter when the publisher of House of Anansi tweeted at me that I was on the short list. So.
Wow.
I knew that the press conference was at 10:45, so at 10:50 I thought, I didn't make it. So I called my partners on the bus to Ottawa. I said, forget it, I didn't make it. And I started washing the floor. So on my hands and knees, and the phone rang. It was my agent, and he said, you made it. So got off the floor.
You got off the floor. And you hired someone, so you
I think it was the long list at first because, in Quebec, I think the Giller Prize, we know less of the Giller Prize. And so and my editor, she's in the room, I think. She said, I'm going to go have a drink. And it was 8 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, oh my gosh, she has a drinking problem, right? So I wrote back and said, what's wrong? Are you okay? And so she explained it to me, and I wasn't sure. And then my mom called, and she was in the US with my little one. And so I said, apparently there's this prize, and the Giller, it's called the Giller, and it's a big thing. And she said, oh, good. Oh, your son yesterday, he ate 2 portions of steak, and he was so nice with everybody, and he slept for 12 hours, and goodbye. That's it.
So you had a drink to join your...
Yeah, no, I don't. Luckily, I don't drink stuff. And then my editor in Quebec called, and I said, don't announce it. Maybe they've made a mistake because there were 13, and it was an odd number. No?
That's the long list.
Long list.
Okay.
Yeah.
And short list was anticlimactic.
I forgot about it, so I was braless when I got the news. Sorry, I did not dress up for this.
You were what?
On Monday morning, I didn't have a bra on.
Did I hear her say that?
I just thought I was wrong.
Why is that stayed in your mind? It's just like,
She would have been jumping jumping up and down. She would have been
You're jumping up and down. Oh, yes, they nice.
Yeah,
Russ,
and then
nice.
usually it has a
I got it.
And at my age, they don't hold by themselves, and so you have to help them. And
Great. I wasn't expecting to get that much from this. But I love it. This is, that's just forever now. There's people hashtagging, what is it? Hashtag IFOA. I don't encourage this, but they do, and at FOA.
have
It's
a
already being
brought
tweeted. Russell, you can't top that, I'm sure.
I was on the other side of the time frame equation, and for me, I thought something would happen around noon. And I've been on long lists before and not made the short list. And the one thing I know is when you don't make the short list, no one phones. Your editor doesn't say, "Oh, it's really too bad. We're going to send you a check anyway." No. Publicists don't call. No one calls. So it got to be 12. Nothing happened, and it got to be 12:15, and phone hadn't rung. It got to be 12:30, so I thought, oh, I'm going to do comments now. So I was in the system doing comments, and I didn't know it, but to the people who, I also am a general manager of a book publishing
Of course you are.
operation. It's bizarre. I write books, so magically I would be perfect. The company had a book publishing arm that I became the general manager of. Mostly I signed things. Yeah, but anyway, they had been watching the Twitter feed, and I was working away in comms, and they came down the hall and stood in my door and screamed. What the hell has happened? And I had no idea for a couple of minutes that something really terrible was happening because they're jumping up and down and screaming in my door.
Were they wearing underwear?
Were you going commando? That's what we want to know. Were you commando, Russell?
I sure hope they were.
There's that suction thing we were talking about earlier. Maybe it's like related here. So, but haven't you ever heard of Half an Hour Later in Newfoundland? I mean, did that
Well,
not ever occur
this
to you?
was a good 2 hours instead of an hour and a half. I didn't know that there was a sort of a fancy bit
Time
first
difference?
where there's some kind of preparation-y stuff.
Right.
I thought it just came on. Here it is, 10:30. There they are.
The Nobel Prize comes out faster than this. Maybe white smoke has to come out of Jack's house or something. That's all done.
Well, if it's white smoke, I can deal with that.
Where are the exits? There's something that Russell said. Yesterday I was talking to him, and he mentioned a particular bookstore that he loves. And just in the few moments we've got left, this is something that's very important about the Gillers, that we think it's about you guys. It's really not. It's not about writers. It's not even about publishers. It's about the biggest benefactor of the Giller Prize is our booksellers and bookstores, and especially those bookstores. We all have them in our lives who we can go there. They know who we are. They know the books. They care. And everyone's got one of these, right? Yeah. And I think you've got the Box of Delights. Is that the one that
The
you
Box of
mentioned?
Delights
Yeah.
bookstore in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. I went to Acadia University, and I'll never forget the Box of Delights. W.O. Mitchell was coming to town. I had all his books, and he was going to be there for a signing, and I went to the Box of Delights. And I could tell they were all at Twitter, but there was no one in the store. And there was no W.O. Mitchell. And I went down to the very back of the store, and in the very back of the store, in a very uncomfortable chair, was W.O. Mitchell. All by himself, with piles of books. So I sat and talked to him for an hour. He must have been delighted.
That's your favorite bookstore, Box of Delights.
One of them, yeah. But it's hard to pick a favorite. I mean, Audrey's in Edmonton is a spectacular bookstore where they always order 4 times more pastry than there's going to be guests. So you can have one of each.
I'll go down with your favorite bookstore.
Oh, Pages in Calgary, Kensington.
Of course.
Pages in Kensington, yeah.
And what is it about that bookstore? What's special?
Well, I've known them. I know the people who run it. I know the people who work there. I love the Kensington neighborhood in Calgary. Calgary's got some great little quirky neighborhoods, and we almost moved to Kensington. We end up in Marda Loop area of Calgary instead.
And Pages is doing okay because we're losing these bookstores.
I know. I hope they are.
Yeah. Alex, do you have one?
Oh yeah, Paragraph bookstore in Montreal. Yep.
Paragraph is fantastic.
It's an amazing, amazing store, and it's right across from McGill, where my dad was a professor. So I grew up, spending time on the campus and then going and spending some time in that store browsing around. It's a great place.
And Paragraph, it's a wide range. It's got newspapers and magazines and everything. I mean, it's a one-stop shopping for so much.
Yeah, it's the bookstore as a community center. What it can be is a place to draw people together, and it's a great place to spend time.
Nancy.
Well, that's my store now, Paragraph. Yeah, it was in Vancouver. All the bookstores kept closing, so I came to Montreal, and it was amazing.
Yeah, it's a great store.
Language bookstore. Yes.
We're spoiled in Montreal.
Yeah,
I think
we had amazing
for French
too,
bookstores. There are so many little ones, and there's one just really 10 minutes from my house. So I spend my time there. They said, okay, do you want to volunteer? Do you want to stay with us? So yeah, I spent a lot of time there. I just love those. Well, because it started off in a very small, tiny townhouse, and then he bought a second one and a third one and turned it into a little bit bigger bookstore. And we have many of those bookstores in Montreal.
Mm-hmm. The people who just love books.
Yeah, not reading them, just being surrounded by.
But what about the whole ebook thing? And we were talking again just last night with some people about how there's a discussion now that whether or not 99 cents is too much to ask for an electronic copy of a book. That people won't pay. You spend $5 for a cup of coffee. But whoa, 99 cents for a book that someone spent like 20 years of their lives living in a pair of pajamas? No way, I'm not going to pay that. What are your feelings about electronic books? Do you think that people will value the books as the way that they value them, and the objects that we love and we create?
Well, I don't have a Kobo or a Kodo or a Fido or a Fudo or whatever they're called. I want a book. I want to read a book. I want reflected light. I was a film student, and I know the difference between projected light and reflected light, and I want to read a book.
And what about the pressure to reduce the price down?
I don't even know what the price. I've just only recently given up my ebook rights. The ebook on 419 just came out. Like, I was hoarding my e-rights for years. I've only now begrudgingly, hesitatingly releasing them.
I love
so I'm not an ebook. I'm not the person to talk to about ebooks.
Well, Kim, one of your aunts was complaining that there weren't enough words in your book. It was not worth the price per word. I know, because as you can see, right, a lot of blanks.
Also,
what was it she said? She said, "Oh, this isn't. You shouldn't charge that much money. There's not enough words in the book.
It's too expensive for blanks, right? And she's my aunt, so I cannot say anything against her. No, but I love paper books just because you see what the other person is reading. So if you like the book, then maybe you like the man behind it or the girl behind it. Right?
And they're beautiful objects. Books, like all these books, they're all beautiful objects just on their own.
Yeah.
You're saying about being surrounded by books in a bookstore. It's not the same as being surrounded by electronic files.
Nancy?
It's true, but I was in Swift Current last year, Saturday night, and I finished a book, and it was midnight, and I had my Kindle that I just bought, and boom, I had a new book. And there's a place for them, and I know many people are reading more, and we're talking about bookstores, but a lot of bookstores are closing, and if you live in a city that doesn't have a bookstore, you have access to all these books now. So I think it's a change, and as you started, we don't like change. But it's a change, and I think there's a lot that's good in it, and it makes it more accessible to read, and people are still going to read. So we can still have our books, but it's another way to read.
Alex?
Yeah, I agree with Nancy. I know I personally prefer the paper book. I spend all day, in front of a screen. So when I read, I want to not be on a screen. But I know so many people who like to read on a Kindle, or who, when they travel, it's so much easier to bring 10 books. And I think, we have to be flexible with the changing times and work with the technological advances.
No, we don't.
Against it or not.
I'm turning into my dad. I'm turning into my father.
Apparently something
electric
happens.
typewriters.
Something happens in your brain.
It's a fad. He always told me electric typewriters are a passing fad. And he was right. Yes, he was right. See? The old man was right. Yeah.
But for places where there's still censorship, a Kindle or electronic books are really great for that. Like in Vietnam, some books are not allowed. So if you go in with just a computer, then you're fine. So for places like that, I think electronic books are great.
It's a double-edged sword for me. I love being able to read electronically because I can make the letters as big as I need them to be. That's a huge help. But the downside of it is I'm in a business during the daytime that decided the best thing it could possibly do is give away all its work for free. And people would like us more.
How'd that work out?
Horribly, because now our work has no value. Now we're trying to turn around and charge people, now we want to charge you to go on the internet. What do you mean you're going to charge us? The internet is free. Well, the internet is free except for what you pay to have the internet, so you're paying for the pipe but not for the water. And I think the big danger is that if you say a book is only worth 99 cents, then you do say a book is worth less than a cup of coffee.
And we are paying a lot for the pipe, and we're paying for our cable, we're paying for all of these things, and we willingly pay for that, but we won't pay for the product that comes down the line.
Yeah, and I think if you devalue your product to the point where you say it's basically free, then you're saying it's basically worthless, and that's dangerous.
On that note, there are books for sale out back. There are authors who will sign your books, and these are the Scotiabank Giller nominees for this year. One of them is going to win. They're all winners. Thank you.